Is all of this obvious in hindsight when you look at the corporate governance structure?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, this was an insane structure, and this one's kind of unique in that you had such a big underlying company that is for profit with this nonprofit board on top of it. But I think it really raises questions about B Corps and I think about ESG to a certain extent. And there are fiduciary duties and there are incentives that need to be aligned. I think when you have boards that clearly have sort of other incentives and other ideas and that aren't about the shareholders and aren't about the employees and aren't about the customers, you can create a lot of problems, which is what just happened.
Let's just go through ultimately what this board, how it differs from others. It's made up of, I think, only about 4 people now because of a few people have been, exactly. Greg had been fired, Sam Altman had been fired, but others like Reid Hoffman had left over the course of the last year or so. And ultimately, this is a not-for-profit board where the whole thesis was that it was the mission over profits. Now, is that replicated anywhere else? And is this something that ultimately venture should be learning from?
Yeah, so I haven't seen this specific structure anywhere else, and I can't imagine we ever will again after the debacle that this all was. But even when you get past that, B Corps, which are kind of hybrid versions of what we're talking about, where they're public corporations and they're for profit, but they're meant to be doing social good. At least I think VCs should be taking a hard look at the bylaws of the boards of B Corps, because then, by the way, I've got 1 or 2 in my portfolio, and we're taking a look at it right now, because I don't want a situation where the board has a moral stance or an ideological stance, and that really comes at the best interest of the company itself. Of course, there's always room on every board to talk about morality and ideology and everything else, but at the end of the day, you have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders or to the investors or whoever it is, and that's what's got to be met. And so while I'm sure most B Corps are okay, it seems to me that the potential for what we saw does exist. And when we're talking about companies like Allbirds and Warby Parker and Ben & Jerry's, we're not just talking about kind of no-name companies here. So I know that I'm concerned, and I think other VCs should be looking at it too.
Bradley, I want to bring an update to our audience. In the private markets, I think this is important. Joshua Kushner, who's the founder of Thrive Capital, has posted on X, every problem has a solution. In the background, there is a tender offer worth hundreds of millions of dollars that is in question here, running this month, where OpenAI employees were due to sell shares with Thrive Capital leading that round. I know you're not an investor in OpenAI, but is there any world in which that tender goes ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think to a certain extent it has to, because you have all of these employees who are probably not making that much money in terms of salary, because that's what happens when you work at a tech startup. And the promise is the pay, the rainbow, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And a tender offer offers liquidity for people who have been counting on it and relying on it. And you have employees who want to move homes or pay for their kids' school or whatever it is. And so I think, whether it's Emmett Shear or whoever's running that company, you have a responsibility, because you're going to have a really unhappy workforce. You already have a workforce where over 100 people signed a letter threatening to quit. And I think this would just exacerbate the problems. The question is, at what valuations? They were talking about an $80 billion valuation on the secondary market for the tender offer. I think that if they can kind of get the ship righted and just wait a few weeks, it probably goes back to normal. But if it continues to be chaos, then obviously investors are not going to pay up at that amount, and the shareholders, the employees, are going to lose value.